So I personally go backpacking regularly in the wettest place in North America, get 270 inches of rain per year, so knowing how to deal with the rain and actually have fun in it is pretty critical for living around here. I want to give a breakdown of what I do for gear and how everything works out. One thing though, I just want a little discretionary kind of pretense to this, is that with testing gear out for rain, you really need to experiment it with yourself to find out what works for you and the conditions of where you live. I really recommend doing some car camping with your gear before heading out into the backcountry, and then you're in potentially a dangerous situation. Okay, so let's talk about active clothing. There's a term called be wold, start cold, and I don't like that term when it comes to being soaking wet. You need to think of your rain clothing in systems. You need to have your active layer and then you have your at camp layer. So with the be wold, start cold claim, the idea is that you don't want to sweat because then you're going to saturate your clothing. The thing is, when it's soaking wet out, you're going to drench anyway, so you should keep your core warm as possible. You're either going to sweat out from the inside or you're going to get soaked from the rain coming down. I put a big emphasis on trying to keep my core warm while I'm actively moving around. So for my Nexus skin layer on my body, I use a nice lightweight synthetic layer. I just use the stuff I use in the summer, my joggers and my sun hoodie. So your Nexus skin layer also has to be something that's very comfortable, and you need to experiment around with it, how it handles when it gets wet. When you're hiking something for a few hours on end, when it's completely soaked through, your clothing can handle a lot different and start chafing and being very uncomfortable. Something that's normally very comfortable for you in dry conditions may not work with you when it's completely soaking wet. Up top around my torso, I like to use an Alpha Direct layer. You could just use a regular fleece layer for that, but I personally like using Alpha Direct because once it gets wet, it doesn't hold on to as much moisture as well. It's able to act as like a barrier too between your shell and your Nexus skin layer. It feels a lot more comfortable with it, and it's gonna help you run a little bit warmer to keep you dry. For down my legs, I personally find I don't need anything really up until like around the freezing temperatures. As long as I'm working hard, my legs will be staying warm. Now for your outer layers, your shells. A lot of people lately have been going with a non-breathable material for their rain jacket. I personally don't like that because when it is raining, you do get those little patches of time when the rain stops or when you're hanging out around camp, and having a waterproof breathable layer is really nice for evaporating the moisture off of you, and you're able to dry out a lot. When you're sweating on the inside with waterproof breathable material, it's not going to dry off efficiently or fast enough. It's more for when you're around camp and you're trying to dry out or the rain has stopped. And then rain pants. I love my rain pants. I always talk about on the channel how much I like my rain pants. Having a pair that's really easy to throw on and over top with big zippers on the side is something that I would look for, because it's a pain to take off your boots and throw them over top. That little barrier entry is going to prevent you from putting them on, and then you're going to regret it later, and you're just not going to end up using them. When you have a large zipper on it, you're able to throw them over top of your pants and then zip it. Personally, I'm using the Arc'teryx Beta rain pants. You guys know me, I'm rough on my gear. These things have held up over the last 4 years, which is very impressive because it is a very abusive layer. You know, it's your pants. I'm always shredding up pants. And then up top, I'm using the Patagonia Torrent rain jacket for this year. Nice balance between being affordable and actually being very functional. I was a little confused about the zipper up front. It takes a while to wet through at the zipper, and at that point you're already soaked completely everywhere else, just from sweat and condensation on the inside. And then you can see up top, I have my lovely Seattle sombrero. This is just a personal preference for me. I just don't like having a hood on and too much of a sensory overload with all that swishing going on around. And I like it so that water's not dripping down the front of my neck, because with a hood, water quite often comes down through there. One thing to note with a lot of your layers, watch out for hoods. You can see how many hoods I got on right now. I have a sun hoodie, my Alpha Direct layer has a hood, and then my rain jacket. It kind of gets a little bit of a mess with all the hoods in there, so just pay attention to that. And then since my core is very warm as I'm hiking around, I typically don't really need much around my hands. It's more when the wind picks up and they're wet is when I'm going to use something around my hands, but at that point, I just only need a thin liner glove. If you need something a little bit more substantial for the Showa 282 gloves, these things are fleece lined and waterproof. I'm just standing around filming right now, so that's why I got these things on. And then for your feet, that's a big topic of discussion. A lot of people like using Gore-Tex or waterproof shoes. I don't like those ones because those things are going to soak through eventually anyways, either from sweat or for going through deep water crossings and water coming from up over top inside. The problem is that now your feet are very heavy throughout the day because they're very waterlogged, and water isn't really able to escape from it. So I like having non-waterproof shoes, so even then when you get them completely submerged, water is able to drain out of them. Your feet are going to be wet regardless, so I'd rather just not have shoes that are going to be as heavy. Some of the gear you may want to consider. So I want to touch on electronics too, because using your smartphone when you're soaking wet hands or you got wet gloves on is not ideal. I've been testing out a smartwatch from Koros. This is the Coros Nomad, and this thing is insanely affordable for smartwatches. Like, I'm gonna price everything Canadian dollars, just to let you guys know how expensive things are. This thing's roughly 500 bucks Canadian compared to something like a Garmin Phoenix, which is what I'm looking at, like $1,300, $1,400. So the cost is nearly 3 times less. And the nice thing about the Coros is it has GPS tracking built right into it. For example, I use AllTrails to find all my routes, and so I'll go onto the website of AllTrails, save the GPX file, and send it over to the watch, and then I'm able to navigate along with that. When you have wet fingers and you're trying to work with your phone to be able to navigate and see where you're supposed to go and figure out each turn where you're supposed to head next, it just sucks so much. You spend so much time kind of all hunched over trying to wipe off your screen. Just be able to hit the physical buttons through here to be able to navigate through where you're going. It's a totally game changer. Has a nice large face to it too, so you're able to see everything clearly. Not on this little tiny wincy screen where you actually can't see where you're navigating through. Being able to track your activities, monitoring your heart rate and everything. Like, I've been using my Apple Watch, and you have to use the screen on your Apple Watch to be able to go through stuff. And then the battery life is insane on this thing too, coming from an Apple Watch. Having a smartwatch to navigate with physical buttons, I highly recommend it. Finally, a watch that's actually built for the outdoors is what it feels like at an affordable price. A little bit of side tangent there. I'm pretty stoked about this thing. If you're curious about any of the gear I've talked about in this video, I have links for everything down in the description. Your backpack itself is somewhere to put a little bit of thought into. Using a laminate material such as Ultra or Dyneema is not going to hold on to water, and it's not going to get as wet. I find all backpacks are going to soak through. A lot of them, even if they're seam taped, they're not going to be seam taped up around where the shoulder straps attach. For whatever reason, companies don't want to seam tape it there, so waterproof fabrics are going to soak through in that area. I personally like using a large dry bag on the inside with a roll top closure. Just a little bit of reassurance, hearing that snap in there. You could get away with a trash compactor bag. I use one of those for years, but just that little bit of placebo effect with the little click, you know everything's locked in. For a shelter, having something that's pitches fly first, it's definitely ideal. It's not the end of the world though. You're just gonna have to spend a little bit of time drying up your camp with either like a Swedish cloth or a towel. You just want to make sure the areas are dry that your sleep insulation is going to be. I personally like using truck and pull tents just because of the geometry of them. So that condensation on the side of the fly will drip down the head down into the gutters of a truck and pull tent. I find freestanding tents can have a lot of weird angles to them where the moisture doesn't drip down as effectively. A good recent example of that is comparing the X-Mid versus the X-Dome. The X-Mid is very effective of having moisture run down the walls throughout the night, where the X-Dome, with its shapes and whatnot, the moisture can get onto the inner if it's not pitched out correctly. I also recommend to bring a bit of a bigger tent too. If you have the option between a 1-person and a 2-person tent, you can have a little bit extra gear with you, so it allows you to spread out with it a bit more, so you're not so claustrophobic of all the gear piling on top of you while you're inside. Getting a material made out of steel poly or Dyneema is the way to go, so you don't have to worry about it sagging throughout the night. Because what will happen is once it gets wet throughout the night, the material will sag and touch the inner, and that will drip down onto you, or it'll start working its way down into the inner of the tent and could puddle in on the inside of it. Fact of the matter is, you're going to spend a lot of time in your shelter, so expanding your living space with a tarp is definitely something I recommend doing. Gives you a little bit more area to hang out underneath, so you're not cramped inside your tent all night. With the increase of interior living space, now that you've brought your tarp with you, you may want to think of bringing something such as a closed cell foam pad just to sit on. Gives you a little bit more insulation, or you can just bring a chair with you as well to get you off the ground. Chances are though your chair is going to be strapped to the outside of your pack, so it's going to be soaking wet, so bring a closed cell foam pad. It's going to make your butt a lot more toasty and a lot more enjoyable. Now for your clothing at camp, you have a few options, but your sleep insulation really is going to dictate that. If you're going to be using down, I recommend having something that's a few degrees warmer than the conditions you're going to be in. For example, I use a negative 12-degree quilt when the temperatures are going to be fluctuating from 0 to 5 degrees Celsius. Just because throughout the night you're going to build up a lot of moisture inside your sleep insulation, and it's going to atrophy and lose a lot of its loft. Clothing is something to think of too as well. If you're going to be sleeping down insulation, I recommend bringing another pair of clothing for a while you're around camp. I really recommend thinking of your clothing in systems for your at camp and your active layer, because the fact is you're going to spend probably a little bit more time at camp and you're going to be a little bit cooler. Right before you get to camp, a trick I recommend doing is pick up your pace for a couple kilometers leading up to camp so you can build up your core temperature. That way when you're spending up some time while you're kind of fiddling around setting up your tent and staking it out, you're not catching a chill at that point. Bring a pair of long johns and a fleece shirt over top. I just use a pair of cheap grid fleece from Walmart, long johns and a zip shirt over top of it. I think each one of them was like 16 bucks a piece, and it's only about 100 grams heavier than my Alpha Direct layer. There are some good cheap grid fleece options out there if you look around. In combination of that and then with a nice warm jacket. Again, if you're going to be using a down jacket, bring something that you're going to be using for more wintertime activities because it's going to lose so much atrophy. or you look at a synthetic fill jacket. I'm personally been using a Patagonia Micro Puff, Macro Puff, or Micro Puff. I've been using that. It's okay. It could be a little bit warmer though. The Rab Zen Air lineup of jackets is a nice affordable option too if you want something that's warm and not going to break the bank. Having a pair of Alpha Direct socks are really nice for having on your feet. It's going to keep them nice and dry. It evaporate all the moisture off of it. Having hot feet overnight just lets them help recover up from being wet all day. It's okay if your feet are wet, as long as they dry off and get some time to recover overnight. Good person to look to who's done that is Andrew Skirko in his Alaska Yukon expedition, where his feet were soaking wet for 16 hours a day for over 100 days of his expedition, and he had no foot issues too. So just for looking after your feet overnight, make sure they dry out during then, you get a chance to recover, and your feet will be totally fine if they're wet throughout the day. That's why I like my Alpha Direct socks. If you guys are enjoying this content, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe. It really helps the channel out. I'm out here suffering in the elements for you guys. I'm getting the shakes of standing here. If you want to have a first-hand look at some of my adventures and videos, head over to Patreon. If you're curious about some of the other gear I got, go check out this video over here of gear that I'd use if I was going a through hike. A lot of that gear I'd actually use in my rainy hiking as well. See you guys over there.